When life feels overwhelmingly loud and messy, there is a very human urge to just escape, to climb away from the noise, the responsibilities, and the grinding chaos of reality to find an isolated place of perfect peace. 2,000 years ago, Jesus offered his three closest friends exactly that kind of retreat. He led Peter, James, and John away from the crushing crowds of the valley, hiking up the steep, quiet slopes of a high mountain to be entirely alone. And then, the environment shattered. Jesus suddenly began to radiate a blinding, brilliant light, and beside him, out of nowhere, stood Moses and Elijah, the two greatest figures in Jewish history. They were discussing what the Gospel of Luke calls Jesus's departure, literally his exodus. It is a deliberate callback to Moses leading his people out of slavery, signaling that Jesus was preparing a rescue mission of his own.
Peter, overwhelmed by the spectacle and desperate to maintain the high, blurts out a plan to build 3 tents. He wants to anchor the moment, to stop the clock and keep this spiritual glory for himself. Before he even finishes his pitch, a thick, terrifying cloud sweeps over them. A voice booms from the mist, cutting Peter off entirely. "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." The disciples collapse in terror, pressing their faces into the dirt. But the next thing they feel isn't divine wrath. It's the gentle hand of Jesus touching their shoulders, telling them to get up and to not be afraid. This mountaintop offered a stunning glimpse of divine peace, but Jesus never intended for them to stay there. The mountain was meant to prepare them, because their real work was waiting for them down at the bottom. The hike back down plunges them straight back into the noise. Almost instantly, the quiet clarity of the summit is replaced by a massive, agitated crowd pressing in from all sides. At the center of this mob, the 9 disciples who stayed behind are locked in a shouting match with the local religious scribes. They are completely consumed by a fierce, pointless theological debate. Standing ignored in the middle of this religious bickering is a desperate father, holding on to a son who is suffering from violent seizures caused by a demonic spirit. There is a specific kind of suffocation that comes when your child is in agony and you are entirely powerless to stop it. This father has watched his boy suffer since childhood, bringing him to the very brink of death. The reason the scribes are arguing isn't abstract theology. They are taunting the disciples because the father had begged them to heal his boy, and they had failed miserably. The disciples had successfully cast out spirits before on previous trips, but that past success had bred complacency. They had approached this desperate boy, relying on their own assumed authority, acting as if the power belonged to them. When placed next to raw, bleeding human tragedy, arrogant self-reliance completely shatters. All the religious posturing in the world was useless to a father watching his son foam at the mouth. The father pushes past the arguing men and throws himself in front of Jesus. Exhausted and thoroughly disillusioned by the disciples' failure, his plea is incredibly fragile. "If you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus immediately catches that one word. "If you can," he replies. He shifts the entire focus away from a question of his own ability, placing it right back on the man's willingness to trust him. The father doesn't pretend to have sudden, unshakable confidence. Instead, he cries out with one of the most brutally honest prayers in history, "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief." Jesus would later compare this exact kind of faith to a mustard seed. It's a tiny connection, full of doubt and hesitation, yet it bridges the gap to something massive and immovable. The size or purity of your faith matters very little. A tiny amount of faith pointed at an all-powerful God is stronger than self-assured faith pointed at flawed human ability. The power flows entirely from the object you trust, not the quality of your trusting. Jesus honors this messy, fractured cry for help. He steps forward, rebukes the spirit, and permanently restores the boy to his father. We often think we need to manufacture a pristine confidence before God will act, but he responds to desperate honesty. He moves when we finally admit we have nothing left. Later, behind closed doors, the disciples quietly pulled Jesus aside. Embarrassed by their public failure, they ask the obvious question, "Why couldn't we cast it out?"
Jesus gives them a sobering diagnosis. He looks at them and says, "This kind can come out only by prayer." Jesus was identifying a breakdown in their spiritual habit. They had attempted to perform a miracle without actually talking to God, forgetting that any power they had in the valley was a gift, not a personal possession. We live in that exact same valley today. It is filled with terminal diagnoses, wayward children, sudden tragedies, and profound chaotic loss. Yet we constantly fall into the disciples' trap. We try to muscle through crises on our own strength, or we distract ourselves by arguing over religious technicalities online, completely ignoring the bleeding people standing right in front of us. The call here is to pack up our comfortable tents. We are not meant to isolate ourselves in spiritual sanctuaries. We are called to take our tiny, flawed faith directly into the darkest, most broken corners of the world. True faith is a rescue mission into the messy, painful reality of life, and the only weapon we truly need is a posture of absolute dependence, armed with a single desperate prayer: help my unbelief.